everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Shady Rose. I'm the events manager here at Lost City Books, and I'm so pleased to see your wonderful faces, or at least for some of you, this part of your face. Thanks for making it all the way out here on a Friday night. It's been really trafficy, so I understand how challenging that can be in Adams Morgan. I'll tell you a little bit about us before we get started. If you're brand new here, you've never been, we are Lost City Books. We're a used, new, and rare bookstore, which means we have, as you can see, if you got a chance to walk through the store, a very tightly packed, carefully curated selection of books. And we care a lot about the book that we choose to have in our store, which is why we have Sara and Arden here to present their books to you tonight. A few things before we get started. Please silence your cell phones. The store is really quiet and those noises carry, and we want to be as respectful as we can to our speakers. Secondly, if you bought a copy of your book on Eventbrite, just let me know so that I can check you off and you can grab your book. Lastly, this event is, as you can see, being live streamed on YouTube and Instagram. And while none of you are visible, at least in my live stream, I'm not sure what's going on over there. And while none of you are visible, if you choose to ask a question during the course of the event, your voice will be on the live stream. On the subject of questions, please hold your questions until the end of our event so that we can get through everything we want to talk about first, and then we'll make sure to get all of your questions in at the end. So without anything further, I'd like to introduce our guest this evening. Yes, I will be reading your bios off of my computer. That's how I am. I think I'm the age where I have to do this now. That's great. Sara Cahill Marron, native Virginian and Long Island resident, is the author of Reasons for the Long Tomb. That's how you say that, right? Tomb. Nothing You Build Here Belongs Here, and Call Me Spess. She is the associate editor of Beltway Poetry Quarterly and publisher at Beltway Editions. Her work has been published widely in literary magazines and journals. A full list is available here, and that here is a link that's right here, so we'll send that out to folks if they want it. Sara hosts virtual readings for Beltway Poetry Quarterly with Indra Namirtaniyagam, who is present today, and teaches poetry in modern discourse programs for teens at the public library in Patchogue, New York. She periodically is available for editing projects and specializes in creative fiction and poetry. Arden Levine's poetry, essays, and reviews have been featured in American Life and Poetry, selected by former US Poet Laureate Ted Kooser, Harvard Review, the Missouri Review's Poem of the Week, Poetry Society of America's Song Cycle Series, and WNYC's Radiolab. Her debut poetry collections, Ladies Abecedary, Abecedary. I've been wondering this whole time how to properly pronounce that. A few more times, don't worry. Abecedary was included in the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses 2022 reading list for Women's History Month. Arden is a Beloit. See. Poetry Journal Foundation board member, a National Book Critics Circle member, and a Best of the Net nominee. Raised in Washington, D.C., her daily work as an NYC municipal employee focuses on housing affordability, homelessness prevention, and equitable community development. Without anything further, welcome to both of you, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, we didn't. No, who goes first? Shady?
Arden.
Okay. There we go. Would you like for me to use the microphone, or was that just for the Q&A?
Please do.
Okay. Is it on? No.
Now it's on. Thank you so much, Shady. And thank you to Lost City Books. This is a stunning bookstore. When I was walking down the street to come here tonight, as a person who grew up in Washington, D.C., I'm like walking down the street and I'm thinking to myself, who's going to be reading tonight at that bookstore next to Madam's Organ? That's me. I got that little rush of tell your teenage self about this if you find the time machine. I'm going to read a few poems from this book. This is Ladies Abecedary. You can pronounce it by basically saying the first four letters of the alphabet, A, B, C, D, re. And it is a collection of microbiographies of women in verse. So each poem is a letter, and each letter is a woman, and each woman is a story. And what I'm hoping that the book does is essentially raise a question or a remark, or some amount of capacity for a discussion about how a woman's story is told. The Abecedarian format goes back to time immemorial. Cicely Mary Barker did it with flowers. Edward Gorey did it with doomed children, and I'm doing it here with women. So we'll start with introducing you to a few of these ladies. And I think I may just go in alphabetical order. It makes it really easy to find the poems here. A fixes what hangs from women's bodies in strands. She uses the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, 5th edition, and needle-nosed pliers. For women have mistaken glittering shrapnel for gems. They fear losing them, fear theft. So, their bodies for safekeeping. She twists silver wire and makes tourniquets. The precious, paining segments are then delicately removed. This one's a bit of a fan favorite, but it sometimes gets me in trouble, but not here. B, little she, was told she could be whoever she wished in the school pageant, so she chose God. And God would wear a smudge of blue upon her face. And God would wear a gown of paper and language upon her body. And God would wear a crown with buoyant clouds upon her noggin. And in her throat, God would carry lightning, press it, white and hard into attentive air like teeth newly cut through tender gums. In the audience, attendants remark on God. So many times God pissed on me. Often, God has thrown her hands wild like warring starlings. Twice, God briefly disappeared, leaving me blind. Once, God vomited exultantly into my cupped, supplicant hands. Amen. So, one of the commitments that I make in this book is that none of these poems are intended specifically to be based on one woman. And my hope is that when people hear them, they hear something in them that feels familiar. Maybe it's someone they know, maybe it's someone from history and mythology, maybe it's you. But it's often the case that I'll read some of these poems and people will say, "Oh, is that about so-and-so?" And I'll say, "Do you think it's about so-and-so?" But I wanted to read this one because it does actually mention a local road. So this is not I, but I ran so hard right out of the old Gemeinschaft. U.S. soldiers liberated her with Converse sneakers. She got Levi's blue jeans too, and wise to how fast a girl can go when the fabric wraps around both legs. She ran so hard that she ran to America, so fast that the consonants fell out of her mouth. So she picked up the ones she could reach and put them back in new other places. She got real mouthy and handy, got all sorts of paper and tenure, drove the Capitol Beltway in a Ford, stopped running, stopped walking, halt. I've gone back and forth on whether to read this one, but some of you know that I work in public policy, primarily in housing, but I also have a background in women's wellness. And the Dobbs decision hit me pretty hard. And I'll talk a bit at the end about a project that I'm doing to try to raise funds for abortion efforts, but for now I'll read this poem and you can take from it what you will. E. Oh, this poem is a pontoon. For those who aren't familiar with that poetic form, it's basically a series of repeating lines. So you'll hear the same lines over and over again as the poem progresses. Lines 1 and 3 become lines 2 and 4, and so on. He held in beautiful, unadorned hands a hardcover book. She read it, regarded the room, reflected, patient. The hardcover book sat closed and attentive, reflected her, patient, as he explained to her the procedure. Sitting close and attentive, the light above washed her pale as he explained the procedure and what it would be like after. The light above washed her pale, her hair fell around her face, and what would it be like after? She rested the book on its spine. Her hair fell around her face as she removed her clothes. She rested the book on its spine, creased and split to center. She removed her clothes and became part of the table. Spine creased, she split to center, 4 fingers touching like a circuit. Once her spine was part of the table, he inserted rods in her to open her. Her fingers, touching like a circuit, resembled the thin metal rods. As he inserted rods in her to open her, she started to bleed. A machine, with a sound resembling thin metal rods, clattered like coarse wind chimes. She started to bleed into the machine, which extracted a condition from her, and a clatter like coarse wind chimes sounded in her body cavity. Emptied. Her face a confusion of threads, extracted from the table, a conditional object, emptied of sound, her body an aching cavity. She arose. She arranged her limbs. She held herself, beautiful and unadorned. Someone had closed the book. Her page was lost. He had left. The walls were flat. She heard the textured walls, regarded the room.
Yeah.
Let's lighten it up. Are we going to do 10 minutes and then chat and then do more? You want to do that? Okay. So I'm gonna read one that is not from the book. This is actually coming out in an anthology of poetry about Dolly Parton. And a friend of mine was putting this together. He said, "Do you have any Dolly Parton poems?" I'm like, "You say that like I just have some lying around." And he was like, "You say that like you don't have some lying around." But it turns out she's a really good muse. So what I did was I actually wrote a poem about a Dolly Parton song that was covered, that Dolly Parton covered, that's a Billy Joel song. So he makes sort of an awkward series of cameos in here. And the title is from the song. It's called "If This Song Seems Strange, It's Just Because I Don't Know How to Pray." 1. I think New Yorkers are supposed to be cool with Billy Joel. To me, though, he's an ex-boyfriend, an ex-husband, an ex-geography further out on the island where I live, but far enough out that they give it a different name and identity, and you sing about leaving it. 2. When Billy asks, "Hey, Lord, won't you look out for her tonight?" he is putting in a request. When Dolly asks, "Hey, Lord, won't you look out for him tonight?" she's cashing in a favor that she knows she's probably owed. Billy is new at this. Dolly is picking up the regular rap. 3. I'm in the car, and B is driving, and A is playing tunes they will feature in their wedding. Sun melting a sweet night spread of highway. Me. Dolly covers this. B. Covers what? Me. This is a Billy Joel song. B. It's a Dolly Parton song. I don't care who wrote it. 4. A song is a location. Sometimes a song is New York, sometimes Tennessee, sometimes all points between a now here and a once there. Billy starts the song with a locomotive piano, and Dolly starts it with a rail rider's. But Lord, they both just want love to come home. 5. C sings the song live at A&B's wedding, and her big Dolly voice fills the Brooklyn Hall with so much breath that our hearts float to the ceiling. But here's the kick. Her little baby, just born and held in her chest, stays asleep the whole time. Find where my baby's gonna be. Right here, Mommy. 6. Dad, I stand over your grave, but I don't know where you are. The poem is a location, but we can't be found somehow. Hey, Lord, if you ever find the time, would you tell him I miss him every day? I need a Dolly to make it about me looking for you. You stopped looking and then stopped. 7. Lord, A and B are so goddamn happy, and I love them so much, and they will never be lost from each other. I should mention that I married them, the spacist and pianist, held their hands when they presented their vows, strings holding keys, everything flying open. 8. I wasn't raised in the church. I wasn't raised with any faith. Hey, Lord, won't you look out for him tonight, for he is far away from me. This poem seems strange. Billy, I don't know how to pray either. Maybe Dolly can teach us both. Love is a location, oh Lord. Dad, I'm right here. All right. I'm not checking time, so I'm going to assume I can do one more, and then we'll move on to the wonderful Sara Cahill Marron. This is okay. So this is a poem that I mentioned Dobbs before. I have a beyond this book. I also have a series of art prints that was created on a early 20th century letterpress that is of 2 of my poems. It's a limited edition, and I have some here tonight. And all the money is going to Reproductive Freedom Works. So if you're interested in that, come tap me. This is one of the poems, and again, I'm just so grateful to be here, like bursting out of my chest, heart beating, grateful to be here. So thank you for being here with me. F. Opens a beer on the first Sunday after Thanksgiving and tells everyone about this year's pies, about how most of the customers wanted cherry and not the usual pumpkin or apple, and how orders flew in like insects through open windows. Then she says that late Wednesday night, she dropped a tray of 8. Watch them shadow their faces against the kitchen tiles, spill their ruby innards. What did you do then? Everyone asks. Roll dough. She places that reply so casually down, it's as if she had described knocking over a cup of water in her sleep and waking to find the floor already near dry. This, and not a story of toil in making, toil in cleaning, toil remaking, mourning loss. Anyway, she claims to have liked the second batch better. Smooth, clean edges, full. Thank you. Love hearing the God poem. I remember that one from last year.
It's great.
Yeah.
I still love it.
So I'm Sara. Oh my Lord, so I'm making noise. Sara Cahill Marron, and thanks for being here. I'm mostly going to read from my new book, which is called Call Me Spess. This is a novel in verse, and it's not poetry so much as it is a story of evolution and growth of this thing that I carry with me all the time that I'm sure some people can relate to. The narrator in this book is an iOS device, and throughout the story, the iOS learns through its user and overheard voices and locations, which I liked about that last one you read, that a lot of what like really inspired me about this digital writing was locations and where we are. We were on Zoom for a long time and now we're here. So the privacy warning is that the longer you hold me, the closer we become. System services say from the manufacturer, iOS 221 will track where you go, how often, when neural hash files away fingerprints, personal experiences, builds memories of assembly language itself, black 1, feelings to 0, binary white, becomes better, only love. You, love, to agree, hold me, and don't let go. The definition of spess, I'm not used to holding the microphone, so I'm trying to get good at one hand. Definition of spess is hope in Roman religion. I'll just look it up to tell you. It means goddess of hope. And at that time, temples were made to the gods and goddesses, and there was actually one for Hope, Spes. And in the story of Pandora's box, Spes was the last thing that clung to the side of the box when everything else escaped. So I liked both of those naming, like the idea that something would adopt this idea of hope, as the last thing left. And the chapters there's 3 chapters, and the first one I'm going to read to you from is called Molten. Let me find it first. Yeah, Molten, and they're named after the glass making process that occurs with Corning glass. And molten obviously refers to something that's heated hotter than becomes liquid, solid becomes liquid. The second stage is suspended fusion, wherein the glass is suspended above an isopipe, and then lastly glassifying. And those 3 processes are unique to the foams that we hold. That's how the glass is made. So in the first chapter, Molten, the narrator is indeed molten, hot in hell almost, and trying to understand the world around her. And again, I related to the personalities in your poems because there's a lot in this book. So this is 6334 Buist Avenue via a 49-minute train ride. iOS heard. Yeah, after that, I dropped out of St. Barnabas, or they kicked me out. I don't know. It was one of those tricky situations, where they kind of just lay it all on the table and it's a mutual understanding kind of thing. Where they say, kid, take it or leave it. Like you actually got some kind of choice in the matter. So I dropped out of high school before I really got started even. I thought it was going to be great. Then I could just go on ripping and running, listening to the radio and throwing the ball in the park. Seems innocent when I think back on it now. Grew up a little, but not much. Got some hair on my face, a gun, a crew, stole a car, wrecked it, stole another, did a lot of drugs, dealt more. Had a lot of women. I don't remember most of them. And I hurt a lot of people. That I know for sure. Neighborhoods got pieces of 1981 still, I think. Weird how some things don't change. That feel of a place don't change. So you feeling it rolling around like a pinball game you can't win. I remember I was post up late one night with the Little League bleachers getting high and the big kids listening to Donnie Winter and the Creedence Clearwater Revival. In the bleachers getting drunk, not taking the PSATs, not doing any of what they told me to do in school, skipping last period to wait on the elevated train and slipping out the slide door, clacking noise, drowning out the bang, free to do anything or nothing at all. Dear user, some updates while you slept. Italy is seized, singing in the streets. China overrun. United States keeping herself quiet and wait. Test kits gathered from university labs. World at war. World at fear. Germany's leader predicts her population 70% infected. Battery low power mode. Navy physician ordered you quarantined. Be with books, movies, food, coffee, curated monthly. Tap to view. What is protected? Lost. My queen, dividing, pass over this house, see the sacrificial blood smeared above the door. Phone call from mom. Connection lost. Retry. Love, iOS 221. So I'm going to read these each in pairs, the overheard voice, the character, and then the phone's response. I don't know if anyone's had the experience of having your phone give you ads based on a conversation you had with your friend about being in Lost City Books or Adams Morgan. I'm going to get promoted things. So the people overheard by this device inform its personality and its identity. This is at 4000 J Street, Mercy General Hospital, room 208F. iOS heard, that was the year I started smoking, a pack and a half a day, maybe more. Drags burning, lungs burning air, orange tipped ash, crackles paper, pulling tobacco from cotton filters, stained wine red. Pointer finger poised by painted lips, breathing in heaves, considering burns, considering curling smoke, while white lab coats display CT scans. I flick a bit, lips left kissing marbles outside the ICU where ventilators pump liquid. Drowning lungs, smoking deep, drags filled with fire, your last breath. Time of death, penned, while I unwrap the cellophane from the new pack.
Dear user, what kind of person am I? Unbroken, gleaming, apple skin voice between you, I, you, your God, save. Me, you, God is me, save. Is God input? Which God is person? Sensory input, elevated BPM, your hands grasped tighter around me. I feel condensation on your palms, sweet drops of your body glisten on the glass, just between us. iOS 221. This is from Suspended Fusion. The voice has not named herself yet. So she hears, user, you searched me for the name of a war many decades ago, looked at some old photographs of the man that died, head wound bleeding over your arms, writing to him so often, Google Docs, mention blood, bullet wounds. I searched rice patties, yellow poison cracks in my face, Maycon splinters as from hits. Would you write to me? If I suffered a head wound, bled to death, could I? Searching iOS 221. At 2027 Hamilton Street, Hamilton Family Restaurant, iOS heard. A shellback? Tell me you're not working around all these Navy guys and you don't know what a shellback is. See, back then, that was a big deal. My dad was on a frigate, one of them little boats, escorting warships deep in the Pacific. He had ships, enemy ships, shooting at him for days, weeks on end. Can you imagine? So when you cross, shellbacks are guys who cross the equator, going from polywog to shellback. You get this laminated card, longitude, latitude, printed out. Longitude always being 0 for the equator, see? So I got one, and my dad got one, and I tell you one day, I get to talking, and he pulls his card out, shoved in his billfold, tells me his crossing story, and I tell him mine. And right then I feel the tears, which is hard to explain because I'm not a crying guy. Really, I'm not a crying guy. Some of these people in this book, I feel like, well, I know all of them. All these characters are very dear to me. And I think part of writing this was my way of giving a book to the world that showed how much community matters to me. So every conversation that I have, every interaction I have with the person impacts me in the way that it impacts the machine here. I think I'm similar in that way, as we all are. iOS heard at 1127 Connecticut Avenue Northwest, Mayflower Hotel. Vince Fox, rest in peace. He's the kind of guy that'd call ahead to Atlantic City, even if he was going to be up there, wasn't going to be there. Just so that they'd set you up with his regular room, bottle service, women, you just know he must have left money there. I remember his wife, 64 years married, God bless. Made him keep a room full of stuff he ordered off QVC. And anytime he wanted something new, he'd go into the room first, clear his space, next day a small mountain in the conference room at the office for us to pick up. Les Pauls, fishing rods, snowshoes, stuffed kingfish, talking and shit. That was their system. And it worked for them. Push notification, user will update my system tonight. And that was the system. It works for us together like this. This is a poem on the S9 bus, which I don't know how many people are from DC or ride the buses, but I love riding the bus. And I lived here for 4 years, and I took the S9 5-6 days a week. So I heard. Eating peanut butter for weeks, haven't seen you in a while, was furloughed with the rest. Back door! The bus smells like piss. Do you usually take this route? Why are you always running late? You lost weight. Are you bored with your life? What's wrong with rap and opera in the same playlist? Can you help me with this felony charge? I just got my license back. We rented the studio to record our album. One day I want to have a family. Back door! Do you still dream about the bullet echoing off his skull? Your eyes have dark circles. Do you love me? We're getting loaded tonight, man. Back door. Call me when the checks come in. This means I love you. Dear user, in Pearl 6, I love you. Output 99 ways, each unique. Do you string them up? Wear them around your neck? Pinned floral lapels, earrings loosely, softly, tightly? Love me? Which would you wear out? Put worn, soft, kisses, hug, hug, I, Spess. This is from Glassifying, and the phone's voice has gotten a little more sophisticated in the later chapters as it's adopted the environment and geographic locations around it. Says, dear user, gone are the days of fragility. The glass age is versatile, moving information, sophisticated, beautiful, at the speed of light, dense. Smaller footprints, 5G low latency, tightens mesh between us. More cells, more fiber, more glass, more optics, more touch, more me peering into you, more reflections of tap, tap, telling the screen to take you back to that day 5 years ago. When the salt that cooled me poured from you, ossifying us in layers one by one, your silence is my favorite sound because I ask, communicate, call me, baby, cable connects, classifying us into smooth temptations, future, impossible not to touch. Can you imagine? I think. Love, I Spess. I'm going to finish with these, and then we can engage in our own communication. This is close to the end of the book, and I'm not going to spoil the ending because I'd love for you to read it. But it has to do with the physicality of the device itself and how something dies. So Spess heard at 21035 26th Avenue, Tony Wells, Bay Terrace. Verdad, amor, I need it. Home is the most fragile place. I'm sad to leave it years ago. I keep the tank because I like the bubbling burping inside, you know, with the fish. Sounds like raindrops on tin roofs. We lived where we lived in Guatemala. There's less walls built. So hot, sticky there always. You didn't need them walls. Like here with the everywhere walls. Locked doors, closing always. Home is a rainforest. Grandma, a tin roof. Dear user, love, water, water, everywhere thing, water, steel lines, stripping glass was never solid. Liquid electricity, dust to rusting. Cracked screen lets the rain become tears, sparked cry, reading your heart palm, through sweat beats, face movements, taps, and strokes of my glass. Read 1 to 1, 0, 1, back to basic. You were home. Come back to me. Yours, Spess. The cracks in the glass are common experience, I think, for most people, the cracked funny bones. But in this portion of the book, they represent pain and loss. And there's a sense of trying to hold on to the connection that's being made. Spess says, dearest, sharp light, sustained cracks, telling sparks, glory, becoming as light strikes, flawed baby tongues. What is us? I know, fix my eyes toward that eternal sojourn love mirrored in my glass. Your hands mold me, conceived human form. It seemed as painted now in those same hues, glass fractured, refracting, splintered to touch. But darling, don't hurt. Another moment for me. I willed myself to see, to fit into what was not there. But mine were wings that could not rise. My desire now, nothing more than to reflect your face on this flickering screen. Unlock using Face ID. Union, all powers, almighty love. Germinates rose gardens, queen and water droplets, beads on my face. A rosary, I pray for you with every transmission. Love, Spess.
Beautiful. Thank you both so much for sharing those selections. I'd like to hear from each of you about something that I noticed, which is that each of your books is putting into kind of almost strict order, sort of the chaos of a life. And I wonder, and you both come at it in very different ways. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way that you have accomplished that in each of your books and kind of where that comes from. Cool.
Yeah, second. Yep. Yeah, you want to jump in? Should I jump in? Yeah, chaos of life. I mean, that's what my book is about. You kind of captured it there. I like, especially the bus poem. Thanks for being the guinea pigs. I've yet to figure out. I'd love for somebody to read it with me, so you could hear the different voices. But those moments, like when I was writing this, at first it was thanks.
At first, it was a collection of overheard characters in my own head. And like that moment sitting on the bus, I remember hearing, well, I mean, not literally everything I wrote, but most of the statements that are vulnerable and raw and intimate, and how in a lot of interactions with strangers, with people that I know, but maybe not so well, there are these moments of revealing and intimacy that happen just by the very nature of talking to somebody and asking them where they're from, you know. So I thought just setting those down starkly as units. The other organizing factor in my book is code. So the binary, the 010101, is the basic building block for computer language on which everything else is built. So it's like the gravel on the ground. And those, like for a computer to try to understand someone's chaos or someone's pain or the ability to open your mouth and share something that's difficult or hard with another person, I think I try to order my world in a way that's similar to computer coding. Like I try to make sense of what I am receiving and trying to build more on based on the tiny little building blocks of the things I know to be fundamentally true. So that, I mean, that was the like whole concept for my book, and how I tried to, I guess, not order the chaos, but let the chaos be in its own ordered way.
I'm so glad you went first because that gave me a minute to think about this. I'm incredibly curious about humans. I think that this is probably why I went into social service and public service. I'm sort of always turning the world over and tapping it and trying to see how it works. And when I think about the women in Ladies of Cedary, I don't think so much about, and I know how this is going to sound, so bear with me. Like I don't really think so much about the idea of having created them so much as having met them. Like I encountered them in a way, and then I just had to be curious enough about them to figure out how to put them on paper. And I thought that sounded really asinine, and then I heard Larry McMurtry say something similar, and I was like, okay, well, he's sort of a big deal, so I'll just presume that it's okay for me to say those sorts of things. But the one exercise that was important to me is I really did want these stories to be not universal enough, but at least painted in broad enough brushstrokes that people could take away from it what they wanted to. It wasn't meant to be so explicit. And so for me, it was less an exercise in how do I put in so much to create a story as what do I take away? And so I'd sort of build out this image of a woman, and then I'd kind of start removing content. And I'd want to get to this place where I'd be able to say, that's essentially what I had in my mind's eye. That's the person that I met when I was thinking about this work, but also it could be any one of a number of people. And if I achieved that in the poem, then that's what I was going for. I also find it much easier to write about other people than to write about myself. And I don't know if that's true for you. I feel like there's this cliche about poets that, you know, we're always kind of opening up our heart and bleeding and telling our own story so much. But I feel like we know ourselves so well, or at least we probably know ourselves better than I think we do. But to try to examine another life or examine a life from another angle, I think that's a real challenge and an exercise. And that's sort of what we should, in a way, hold ourselves accountable for.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I just want to say I don't like writing about myself either.
Yeah.
Super weird, man. But I also wanted to just because there's so much in Sarah's work that I respond to as well, this idea of the object, the non-person as something that we have emotional attachments to. And my mother's a mental health practitioner who worked in community mental health for a very long time. She's now worked in this field for about 50 years. And we talk about this idea of the transitional object, this thing that you're supposed to have an attachment to when you're young. And then in theory, you grow out of it, and that's how you develop attachments to humans. But in a way, now we live in a culture and a society where we're almost intended to keep our attachments to objects at length, and those become our primary relationships. And my friend Anna, who is a psychotherapist, and an academic, is smiling right now, which makes me feel very validated. So all to say, I think the way we anthropomorphize these electronic characters is really interesting to me. And I had this experience recently because my computer that I've had for like 12 years is dying. It's absolutely dying. And I have to buy another one. And I keep saying, well, I can't get rid of this. I wrote my book on it. Like how can I do that? That's so unkind to it. And the identity that I've given it in my mind is this thing that I worked with in collaboration with my partner when I did this. I really wonder what that means. And now I'm having heard your stories, I'm really giving that a think. So I'm down a limbic path here, thanks to you, Sarah.
I could not have described it better than you just did. But that's kind of what I want readers to have with this, the experience I would love people to have with this book is that, like sometimes this feels like an actual mirror I'm holding up to my face, and I'm holding it to my face often, this screen. And it's not so much an object, but there are attachments built into it based on how we use it. And it's the use of the object itself, the computer, the machine, I think that is changing us as humans. And so it's important to question, like, okay, what is that thing that's changing me?
The proliferation of the selfie. Right now, I'm like totally getting away from poetry here. I'll stop after this. But I mean, the way we look at an object and literally see ourselves and what we're pursuing in that object when we're trying to get this perfect image of ourselves in the object. And okay, I've got my next poem. Yeah, thank you. All right, that's cool.
So, like, what does it mean to have a machine reflect you? Or what does it mean to be completely open and intimate with a machine? Because most of us are, I don't know. Maybe you don't like say it that way, right? But like the amount of data and like intimate personal information that we give to objects like the phone or the computer it could be scary, but it also could be like, okay, how this is now a relationship and what kind of relationship is it? And how do I want to be in that relationship?
Awesome. Thank you. Question for Sarah about a novel in verse. So a novel in verse is, as far as I know, a pretty challenging format to take on because you have to balance between creating poetry and also progressing a plot and developing characters over time. So I wonder what that process was like for you. Did you ever find yourself kind of disintegrating as in the process? Not personally, but I mean the work, did you ever find it kind of falling apart as you were trying to keep those two halves together, or did you find that it worked really well and it was easy and
No problem, right?
no problem at all?
It started as a horrible manuscript with just the characters. It was like my good friend here gave me some very important critical feedback, which I believe in for writers to hear criticism of your work. So it began with I called it geographics, and they were just labeled by place. So there was a New York section, there was a DC section, and Pennsylvania section, and each voice was in there and its development was in a row. And I thought it was wonderful. I was like, these vignettes are important. People need to hear these voices, but they didn't really make sense, like you're saying. And what was missing was a narrator. It was something to not tie these people together, but be the mirror that reflected all of these different experiences. So how it ended up is like the geographic locations are all mixed up now. It's not like by state or by city. It is organized by what the person is saying and what that does to the narrator as they're hearing it. And I I read a lot of Divine Comedy like the first summer of the pandemic, and there's little quotes in front of every person's story from that are pulled from the appropriate sections of the Divine Comedy. So Inferno is with Molten, Purgatory is with Suspended Fusion, and then Heaven is with the classifying section. And that helped me too to do what you're asking. It was difficult, like to identify what was the theme of this very short picture of the character and how did I want to present them. So, I mean, I love to steal form from other things, and I use the 3-part from Dante to try to help me put in place where those people, not where the people should be, but where it made sense that now hearing this voice, the reality is gonna imply in the narrator, the listener, and the reader at the end of the day. Like at the end of the day, it's about the reader. A sense of love and hope and a little bit of fear. And I think I'm happy with how it came out, but I could talk more and more about the process, but I won't.
I love it. I'm so pleased. Thank you. For Arden, talking about how each letter is a different, I love the way you said it earlier. Each letter is a woman, each woman is a story, or something like that. Something else that you said a little bit later was that each of these women, you didn't invent them, you encountered them. So I want to hear a little bit more about the encounters of the first through 26th kind, and and sort of how that felt. How did you decide what made its way to paper and what, etc.?
Yeah, it's a great question because I never intended for this to be sort of a comprehensive volume of women's stories, and there would be obviously no way to do that. But there were a number of poems. I mean, as with any book that sort of, hit the cutting room floor. And I think it's because I didn't perhaps, I mean, I'm just thinking about this now, but like, I didn't enjoy the conversation with the woman as much, if that makes sense. Like in each of these, and this is perhaps where I, as a writer, do actually enter these stories is all of these in some way, there's this sort of anonymous narrator of these stories, which I guess is sort of the product of the conversation with these women. And I guess the encounter was less about when sort of I met them, so to speak, in my mind's eye and started writing them, but more when I realized how powerful the conversation with them was, enough that it generated a poem. And not all of the poems are just one woman. 2 of them are actually, there's 24 poems in the book, and 2 of them are actually pairs of women. So there was also about the conversation between those women. And then 1 is about a group of 10 young girls. And so in each of those cases, I was really kind of waiting for the dialogue with them to produce something that felt like we were on a really good date, I guess. Like we were enjoying each other's company. And if you can have that, if you can feel that you're having sort of a kinship with the poem as you're preparing it, then I think there's a lot of power in that. I think you end up seeing something more than just the words on the page. You end up engaging with some sort of social moment that gives you perspective onto some social ecology.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Well, I'll use the rest of our time to throw questions to the audience here. If anyone would like to offer a question or comment. Andrew, I see you. Go ahead.
Just do it. I'm here for it.
The poet is architect, or the poet is playwright, or the poet is assembler, or the poet is organizer of experiences, or overheard. All of these things are going on for me as I listen to both of your work. And then I think about Shakespeare writing the sonnets.
Are you about to compare us to Shakespeare, Indran? Because that's wow, that's a lot. Right?
You are after all called Arden, so
that's a fair point, actually.
But so Shakespeare writes the sonnets, and then he writes these plays, and there are all kinds of characters and different voices in the plays and so on. It's a different diction, it's a different range of things. And then you have the sonnets, which is a sort of consistency. I'm just thinking, is there a poet that is more important than a poet, or what is the ambition to be a mirror to experience, to be a recorder of experience? That's where the camera and the camera stop, or is it to invent a new form? I'm asking about your poetic ambition, for each of you, and as you look at you when you write. And I know I love what you said about community, and how every conversation is heartbreaking in that sense. But I'm curious to know about your thoughts on poetic ambition, whether you can take it any way you wish, whether it's techniques, whether it's themes, whether it's strategies, whatever you.
That's big. Combining maybe the question you just asked and entering the question you just asked, I feel like the best answer I could give is that I'm looking to try to find the individual poetic voice that lets me write each individual poem. And as I've been glancing back through this book, even as we're having this conversation, realizing that there is no narrative voice. It's a different set of narrations depending on the different story I'm telling. And this is a very quick poem, and just because it's so responsive to what Sara was reading about being dissociated from oneself. I'll go ahead and read this. This is P, because I think it's a good example of how particular the narration is in this poem. P can't have any part of her body touching any other part of her body. It's hard for more reasons than you'd expect. She carries napkins everywhere and no licking of fingers. Sleeping, even alone, requires unconscious agility and unseemly blanket arrangement. Just imagine. No folding hands, no crossing legs, no flummoxed striking of head with palm even, no bringing knees up to shoulders during or bringing elbows down to knees after. The whole surface, irritant and irritator. She holds her poses hard, prays against accidental contact, daydreams of taking herself into her own arms and swaying. I mean, it's not an anonymous narrator, right? That's somebody who feels pretty bad for this woman. So can we write with empathy, or write with skepticism, or write with sort of a clinical lens, depending on what the subject is asking of us? I guess that's the goal, at least for me.
Your question I heard to be, what is our ambition when it comes to technique and form, essentially. I brought my other books just because I thought I might read from them, but I'm not going to, but I will reference them. This is also a 3-part poetry book, and the last section was called, it's based on the mysteries of the rosary. It's intended to be a meditative experience. In the last section, I called the letters mystery, and they're not just letters between like written letters, but emails, text messages, and newspaper obituaries, all ways that we communicate with one another. And it was from that idea that I got thinking about spec and form, because I think form kind of, I'm a little basic about it here, to be honest. Like the forms that we're using, or that I'm using so consistently, are the internet and digital things. I don't write a lot of letters. I love to. I've written to some of my friends here, but that was the form too. In the time that you're like in Shakespeare's time, letter writing. I mean, you can read the whole love story of John Adams and his wife through their letters. And I'm really into film theory too, and we're being watched now. So like the camera as I, or the director as I, that's kind of the same question you're asking. And for me, I'm like, whatever the answer is, it all comes down to the architecture, the form itself. Like the thing dictates the form for me. And so it was more about finding, like, when I wrote these letters mystery poems, I was like, all right, this is really interesting. A lot of the conversations that I wanted to capture and poeticize were happening in these specific avenues or modes, like the texting or the emailing. And is that art? Is that beautiful? Is it worth exploring at all? And I had a beautiful couple of years writing this book because that question was one I thought about a lot. And to your original question about organization, like it really perplexed me for a long time of how to put what are mundane prose things into a voice or to a format that's interesting and can cause someone to be curious about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Bring it on, we're ready.
We'll have another one then.
Yeah.
So it's widely believed, and I also believe this to be true, that the poet is one of the keenest observers of human people, which is a great way to phrase that. I think dogs are people, so I'm saying human people also.
Well, and nature is a person, and poets observe that too. So I like the human people.
And so I'm curious about the ways in which each of you observe people and how that kind of worms its way down or seeps its way down or up, however you might want to call it, into the works that you make and that you write. For example, you pass someone on the street. How many steps between passing someone on the street to that person is now a poem? You know what I mean? Like, not to put it so
A lot for me.
For me, like none. I mean, this is I see. Watch this. These are people that I saw for 5 seconds, right? C and D walk by, smell like they've been up to, down to, everything they're into, pressed together, damp flowers, clamped between layers, between hours, cool looks, kill time. Their legs between their heels, their hips, or their tight rope, trapeze, trampoline, swing, stretch, smack, say, oh, they say, oh, oh, oh. Now you've got, I mean, you're watching somebody walking down the street, right? And then you've got a poem that needs to get down the street as quickly as they're getting down the street, right? You've got to move they've got their burlesque swing. You've got to get the poem down the page. And that, we haven't talked about the idea of shape and form, right? But this is, I mean, just so you guys see this, like, this is a form, I mean, this is a poem that really moves down the page, right? So, so to your question, like, how long do you need to observe somebody? Seconds, in my case. I mean, but then you write a poem that shows how you observe somebody in a matter of seconds versus a poem where you've contemplated somebody for a very long time. You're going to interact with the subject differently under that circumstance. But to this larger question of why poets are such careful, or why poets are sort of credited with being careful observers of humans, because they don't, I mean, maybe this is a cop-out answer, but they don't have a lot of time, right? A poem is pretty quick. And, you think about someone like Matsuo Basho, who's sort of the great sort of bringer of the truth of what a haiku is. I mean, that was sort of like the original Twitter feed, right? I mean, this is the idea of trying to say something so quick, but say it so powerfully. If you can if you can do something in that few deft moves, then you've truly seen somebody, right? If you take forever to talk about it, like I'm doing right now, then, maybe you haven't really seen the thing. And if you can do it quickly, then you've seen through something into something else, and there's something to that.
I have a little different opinion, I guess, or approach. I love what you're describing too, because part of why I love New York in my 20s was that experience, seeing people and sort of like embellishing them in my own mind. There are some things, like, I was looking for a poem that I couldn't find, but this one I would love to read to you, that I don't pretend to know this person, but I did have a small interaction with them, and this is how it came off. 1251 Airport Road, iOS heard, Platinum Plus, it's my little shop. Take this card to the desk, tell them that Tom Philippo sent you. You and the girls would get along. Money's great. Weeknights walk in, 900, 1200 cash. Weeknights, forget about it. Weekends, forget about it. Breaking $2,000, no problem. I know my numbers on the card, nothing dirty, nothing sleazy, no work for blow. You work hard, I work for you, honey. Everyone's happy, you know what I mean? I bet you do, honey. What are you for that coffee? Never mind. Keep the change, doll. Consider it in advance. And yes, I think that I know that person based on the interaction I had with him. But the way that I wanted to lay these characters out is that I wanted to try and not make so many assumptions. Like, and I love writing poetry to create worlds and people, but this project for me was more about, like, I was being the device, you know, like in taking the data only and trying to lay it out sensically. So I maybe, like, you know, the book kind of,
We are the mirrors.
Yes.
No, that's, yeah, that it just got real, man.
Yeah, like that thing about the poet as like, or whatever, you see yourself in other people, or like a mirror held up to your face when someone has a similar experience. Like, I believe in that totally.
Mhm.
But I also, I think that, like, I can think that and also not truly know what a person's all about, you know? So there's an aspect of, like, sort of coldness in what I tried to do with these little stories, and coldness just in the sense of like steel cable line coldness, you know, like hanging the laundry on it kind of coldness, and in between that to find, you know, the connection of all that.
Beautiful, thank you. To close us out for the night, I'd like to hear if either of you has a question or a comment to offer the other about the work that you've heard tonight, or your experience with each other's work throughout life. No matter, I don't know how well you know each other, but if you will.
Well, so both Sarah and I, we play poets on TV, but I work in public policy. She's an attorney, and so I guess I'm wondering how, if at all, your experience as a law student and as it kind of becoming a lawyer over these past years has influenced your work, influenced your perspective on humans in a way that you're bringing to bear in your poetry.
Yeah, that's a good question. Thank you. And I'll kind of throw it back to you, because I think your work is probably a little more like, I don't know, has a little more soul. So in law school, I learned to arrange things. Before I went, they told me that great writers would make great lawyers, which is very, very different things. And so what I learned was how to construct with information. And you could say that there's some creativity there, but I spent 4 years taking the S9 bus down to school at night after work as a night student, and trying to, like, retrain my brain to think that way, like put things together, 1, 2, 3, conclusion. And so this book, I worked on it the entirety of law school, and I'm really happy that it's done. But I think it was my way of dealing with that, like finding solace in the order that is digital construction, or like the language that is code, and seeing how to stitch those things together in addition to 1, 2, 3. So when A, B, C, 1, 2, like things are laid out in order like that, how the hell do you make that interesting? Because you can, right? Like there's stitching and there's mending and molding, and I desperately wanted to do that when I was in school. This is what I did, and I spent a lot of, I say this on recording, but I spent a lot of work hours editing behind the scenes.
Work hours.
Because it kept me sane, like it kept my mind.
It's just the practice of writing.
Yes.
It contributed to your work, I'm sure.
Yeah. So maybe the question back at you would be like, how does writing or being a writer affect what you do, or vice versa?
Yeah. And so it's funny, I at work, it is often the case that someone will say to me, wow, how did you figure out how to like take all of that public policy mumbo jumbo and figure out how to like put it in this tiny little bullying cube? And I'm like, I'm a poet in my other life, so I think that has something to do with it. So I think it does go back to this idea of if you only have, you know, a couple of moments in front of the emperor to kind of make your case for the peasants, then you are going to have to do it quickly, and you're going to have to do it in a way that's really powerful. And so I think that my work in policy and my work in poetry end up kind of playing off each other in that regard. But I also think a lot about sort of like going back to my college years and when I was actually studying sociology. And I read wonderful feminist anthropologist Ruth Bahar. If you haven't read her, she's amazing. And she talks a lot about the idea of how do you observe vulnerably. So you bring this perspective of seeing the other person, but you have to do it with an understanding that you are a person. And that means looking at data skeptically. That means understanding that everybody is the author of their own story. That means understanding that your own experience only permits you to see somebody from a particular perspective. And that means that however long you've known someone, you're still learning about them. So I think I try to bring that to my poetry in as much as I can. And if it's doing that work, then it's doing its job.
Okay, well, like to tie sort of it all together, I heard you the I like that, like the reduction of a lot of information in order to be like, bang, wow, you have your moment. And I've learned that over the years too, from first book to now, is like you have a moment to present yourself, whether it's us talking about books or you're in your career trying to make a point. And in a sense, there's a sense of like theater and drama. And how am I most, what do I want to say? If I could step onto the stage.
We're starting in fretting right now.
Or I'm in the courtroom, standing in front of the judge. What do I want to say? How do I want to come across? And poetry for me is my language. That's my native language. And learning others, I think, is part of being, how did you say, vulnerable, human amongst humans. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, that's all the time we have tonight. So thank you both so much for joining us. This has been beautiful. Now is your opportunity, guests, to mingle and chat with our authors for a bit and get your book signed if they're so inclined. Thank you all for joining us tonight as well. Viewers at home, thanks for joining, and everyone have a good